When I hear somebody go on about how much blood there is in AEW, not many positive thoughts come to mind because I think that this mindset is born of ignorance or it is born of your own personal aversion to seeing other human beings bleed from the forehead. That's valid. You know, it's absolutely valid if you're a bit squeamish, if you think that it's a thing of the past, the way that Vince wants you to think it's a thing of the past. Personally, I think that Vince McMahon has a lot to do with it because for the past 15 years, Vince McMahon has not allowed blood in WWE and has even gone as far as to say that it's barbaric. It's barbaric that people would still cut their foreheads to simulate blood in a simulated combat sport, which is the whole reason why you're seeing so much blood in AEW. This is a simulated combat sport, and they're trying to give you as real of a product as they possibly can without them actually destroying each other. This other company over here, WWE, they're all about content. They're not about stories. They're not about psychology. They're about content. They're a content mill so they can get as much money as they can, or as Vince can get as much money as he can. And why does he need so much fucking money anyway? 77 years old. Oh, that's right, to pay off all of the women that he raped. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a different story. What I think about when I think about blood in professional wrestling, besides the territory days where people would do it all the time, and these people complaining about it, if they lived in the territory days, oh my God, you wouldn't survive. You'd faint at every match. Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, Harley Race, Abdullah the Butcher, Carlos Colon, Greg Valentine, all just it would be easier to name the people who didn't blade back in those days. I think about when I used to watch WWE after the PG turn in 2008 and how little sense it makes to me that people aren't bleeding after they have their heads raked back and forth, right? A chain link fence, or bounced into that chain link fence, or bounced off of a post, curb stomped onto steel steps, curb stomped onto a steel chair, having their head sandwiched between two chairs, you know, and they come up, not a mark on them. That, my friends, makes way less sense to me in a simulated combat sport, or just simulated combat, since Vince is all about sports entertainment. Then, you know, every week somebody in AEW bleeding. It's all about perception. It all depends on what you've been watching your entire life. And it also depends on how far up the ass Vince McMahon you are. Because I think that this issue would not be an issue if the top dog, so to speak, for the last 15 years hasn't been trying to present as clean and as sanitized of a product as they can so that this person can have a political career without too much, you know, backlash for their past, like Linda McMahon, for example, or you know, they say it was for sponsors and to get a younger audience. That's all that is. They're just bullshitting you. It was all for Linda McMahon. If we did not have these past 15 years of bloodless professional wrestling at the tippy top, we wouldn't have anybody complaining about this. But from where I stand, AEW is providing something that WWE has not been providing. And that's why there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of overlap between people who religiously watch WWE and people who religiously watch AEW, because it's kind of like two different kettles of fish, is it not? You've got one company who is really trying to get as close to realism as they can while staying within the cartoon world, kayfabe world of professional wrestling, and sometimes completely abandoning kayfabe, because as much as Jim Cornette would like you to believe, unlike what Jim Cornette would like you to believe, we're no longer living in 1980, okay? The business was exposed a long fucking time ago. So even if kayfabe is thrown out the window, who fucking cares? Jim Cornette cares. And people like Jim Cornette care. And people like Jim Cornette are piles of shit because Jim Cornette is a pile of shit himself. And then the other stuff, which is just a bunch of people in a ring talking for 2 or 3 hours with like 20 minutes of wrestling. Of course, there's not going to be any need for blood in WWE. But if there is a need for blood, guess what Vince McMahon would rather have somebody do? He would rather have somebody get them to bleed what is known hard way. So going back to, I think it was 2015, Brock Lesnar came out and elbowed the living shit out of Randy Orton. Just elbowed him across the forehead, and he gets up and he's just bleeding everywhere. And it wasn't even for anything because the ref came over almost immediately and like staunched the blood. Just like, put the gauze down there. It's like, so you gave this fucking guy a potential concussion instead of him just taking a blade and making a little just like that? The things that Vince McMahon sees as barbaric, they seem to be very arbitrary and they change like that. He used to see the UFC as barbaric, but when Brock Lesnar wanted to come back, he saw a dollar sign. So it's not so barbaric to have Brock Lesnar come out and have MMA shorts with the sponsors and all that stuff, and have Triple H walking an MMA guy down the ramp and all this other stuff. He used to think that, he used to think that blading was okay, and then it became not okay because he had some other masters to serve other than himself. That being the corporate masters that he chose to serve because he chose to want to hoard money like some eviler version of Scrooge McDuck. And it's like the lack of blood in WWE makes far less sense to me. When I watch somebody in a cage match or a Hell in a Cell match or an Elimination Chamber match and their heads getting bonked off of all sorts of hard objects and all of the stuff that happens to them that would have normally drawn blood back in the day, and they just get up and there's like in nothing, not a mark on their face. That to me is a lot more unusual than watching AEW and seeing blood every week, if it even has been every week. The one issue I will take is that they gotta be a little more surreptitious with this stuff. I don't want to see Jon Moxley blading out there in plain view. I don't want to see Konosuke Takeshita passing the blade back to the ref in full sight. They have to do something about that, absolutely. That much, that is pretty ridiculous. And they're far from the only people who have been caught blading, but I think the one that Moxley, my God, the camera was just like right on him as he was just meh. So, yeah, that is one thing that they could do a little bit better now that we're talking about blood. But there is not too much blood in AEW. I think that people are just used to seeing a product that has been relatively bloodless, both metaphorically and literally, or literally and figuratively now for 15 years. And they look at AEW and they're just doing Vince McMahon's bidding for him. His little foot soldiers, his little marked foot soldiers. Oh my God, that's barbaric. He could tell these people anything is barbaric and they would probably follow suit because, that's how it goes over there. So that's what I have to say about that. There's not too much blood in AEW. Not at all. They're not even approaching the levels of the 1980s, the territory 1980s, and before that, not even approaching those levels. But, people like to exaggerate. And people like to, when they feel strongly enough about something, passionately enough about something, they'll exaggerate little details here and there. AEW ain't close to what it used to be in the blood department. So maybe find something else to complain about. Have a good day, folks.